In our study of the synthesis of yoga, Sri Aurobindo has first prepared the ground for the release from subjection to the body, which is the theme of this chapter. And next chapter is the release from the heart and the mind. And we are at the last paragraph of release from subjection to the body. In the discussion so far, he led us step by step to the process by which we can separate our consciousness from identification with the physical body. But along with this, he says we have to necessarily deal also with the prana or life energy. And in the portion we read last time, he discusses how a life energy operates, although one, it operates in different ways in the physical body and in the mental body. For practical purposes, we have to make a distinction between the life energy as it acts in the body, the physical prana, and the life energy as it acts in support of the mental activities, the psychical prana. For we lead always a double life, mental and physical, and the same life energy acts differently and assumes a different aspect according as it lends itself to one or the other. This distinction is something unique to Sri Aurobindo. In most yogic traditions, the life energy is dealt with as operative in identification with the body. So as part of the Hatha Yoga process, through asanas, one works on the physical consciousness, frees from it to a certain extent, attains to awareness of the life force, and then through pranayam, one masters the life force. We discussed last time the 5 vayus, the 5 operations of the life force. But the operation of the life force in the mind is not normally dealt with as a distinct character of the same life force. It is all treated as part of the general mental operations, at best a mix of habits, but where those habits come from is not so clearly delineated. But finally, the point Sri Aurobindo makes is that both body and mind have a life because life force embeds itself in them. So we have a physical life and a mental life. Life force in itself does not give life because it is not the substance to create form. It is only energy. It is only when it identifies with the body that you have form from body and kinetic energy from life force. When it identifies with mind, it takes the mental form of ideas and the kinetic energy from the life energy. In its own domain of prana, there are things, experiences and forms purely in the vital world, but those forms are not fixed. They are much more malleable. They are almost felt as if symbolic. When we have strong dreams where we feel ourselves having an intense emotion, intense joy, intense pain, intense sadness, that we feel ourselves as substance of sadness, that is characteristic of the experience in the vital worlds. But even there, the form itself comes not so much from the prana, but from the mix of these other principles. So, recognizing in what way the life force acts differently in these two domains is extremely important, not only for the aspect of liberation, but much more for the aspect of transformation. And that's why Sri Aurobindo makes this distinction. And as a result, another peculiar characteristic of Sri Aurobindo's vocabulary and in the yoga comes forward in the terms that he uses for higher vital and lower vital. And the operation of life force, the vital in the body, is the basis of the lower vital working, and the operation in the mind is the basis for the higher vital working. In practice, most people tend to view the lower vital as something negative. And I've heard many long-time devotees and sadhaks refer to the lower vital only in negative terms. But we must recognize that it is negative only when it asserts its limitations on the rest of the being. Otherwise, it is a very important part of our life, and in the transformation plays a crucial role. So he describes here what it does in the body, and this is all the basis of lower vital impulses. In the body, it produces those reactions of hunger, thirst, fatigue, health, disease, physical vigor, etc. Among these is also the instinct of all instincts related to survival, including instinct of fear, instinct of aggression, tendencies for anger, tendencies for jealousy, centering around one's narrow physical requirements, although one quickly moves through these into the proper emotional being, which is part of the mental functioning. But you can see how they are also rooted in these instincts of survival, and in particular the reproductive instinct, which is tied to these. They are all based in the working of the life energy in the body. So you can see why hunger, thirst, fatigue are so critical for survival of the body, and therefore any instinct arising from these, nature makes them strong enough that they will overcome everything else, including the mind. So your mind, because it is bored of eating, it finds eating not so interesting, will neglect eating while you're reading an interesting novel or doing some interesting work. You will often see students when they are deep in their work, or artists when they enjoy their work, ignore thirst and hunger. And if they continued like that, at some point the body would collapse. So nature has an automatic correction by pushing so hard that it overwhelms the mind and compels you to turn to satisfaction of these survival instincts. And if by force you ignore them long enough, the body shuts down the mind, makes you fall unconscious so that it can correct itself. And so health, disease are also part of this domain, because they all involve the life energy working to maintain the body operations. And these are, he says, the vital experiences of the physical frame. For the gross body of man is not like the stone or the earth. It is a combination of two sheaths, the vital and the food sheath, Annamaya, food sheath. And its life is a constant interaction of these two. So what distinguishes the human body from the stone is the second sheath which comes on top of the first. So in the stone we have the physical Annamaya form, sheath, but the vital sheath is not organized as an independent principle. Yes, life energy is everywhere, but the life force in the stone is embedded in the matter and is only seen as a secondary working. In the human consciousness, the life force is a separate body in itself, overlapping and overlaid on the physical body. And as long as the two are working together, you have a living body. When the life force body separates, the physical body falls unconscious or dead. So the interaction between these two is the basis of the physical life. So we can see the whole thing as one unit, the two bodies interacting as one unit. But for our purpose, it's important to separate them and recognize what is done by which, the limitations of each one as well as the strengths of each one. So he says, still, the life energy and the physical frame are two different things. And in the withdrawal of the mind from the absorbing sense of the body, we become increasingly sensible of the prana and its action in the corporeal instrument, and can observe and more control its operations. So this is where we discussed last time the 5 vayus and how they operate both for the physical bodies working and the minds, but also for the spiritual working. Practically, in drawing back from the body, we draw back from the physical life energy also. Even while we distinguish the two and feel the latter nearer to us than the mere physical instrument. The entire conquest of the body comes in fact by the conquest of the physical life energy. So this is where the distinction becomes important. When you want to master the body consciousness, body processes and operations of life, you have to have mastery of the life force, and the life force then mastered gives you mastery of the body processes. Yoga practice leads to. In the experience, the life is nearer to us than the gross body, because it is in the life force that we find the plasticity of the mind. So the mind wants to do this and the life force bends and moves along it. But the gross body does not. The gross body responds not to the mind but to the life force pushing the body. So it is one step removed, and the mind itself does not have a direct experience of the body except through life force. You will recall a passage which we had read in the same chapter, where he says that one of the signs that the mind is coming to its right poise in relation to the body is that we may even come to feel that the body is in a certain sense non-existent except as a sort of partial expression of our vital force and of our mentality. That kind of feeling that the body itself is non-existent, it is just something ephemeral, superficial, and it is formed by mind and life force working together and concretizing their operations. This feeling, and we discussed there's a truth to it, and the truth is this, that the gross body itself is a condensation of the working of the life energy in material domain. And that's why the form of the body is cast in the mold of the life force, the pranic body, which itself is cast in the mold of the mind awareness, and the powers of the mind awareness are represented by the limbs and the organs and the way they function. So it's possible to go very deep in this, and there are many mystical traditions which have worked on it, taking it all the way to a spiritual symbol of the divine consciousness in the material form. But if you just look at it superficially, you will notice that our consciousness in the mental form is centered primarily here at the top, and therefore all our primary senses are operating from here. Because it's the consciousness looking, it's the consciousness listening, it's the consciousness tasting, smelling, and so on. And so it is almost as if the consciousness turns to the five senses, through the five senses, and organizes in the life energy body the working of the five senses, which concretized become the five organs in the gross body. Similarly, your consciousness, when it looks, it wants to reach out to act. There is an impulse of the mind to reach out, which then becomes impulse of energy to reach out. And the energy moves in the direction which you want. And the energy itself, in order to grasp, has two facets. One is a taking, pulling inwards, and another is a pushing outwards. And it is the duality of these two which allows you to hold, to separate, to manipulate on things. And this gets represented by the mind turning down and splitting into two movements, reaching out. And these become organized as two energy flows in the vital body, which get organized in the physical body as our two arms. Again, they get further distinguished in the fingers, which allows this movement. Now, when you actually operate on a physical object, let's say you lift up a stone, or you try to open a jar, unscrew the top of a bottle, you'll find your mind intends to do something, the energy moves, the body follows. You are not really conscious of what the body is doing. Your primary attention is on the intention which you want the bottle to be opened. All the rest is happening almost mechanically. The energy moves forward, your hands grasp your finger, and that's happening at a level which is much lower than the mental consciousness. The mental consciousness intervenes only when something is not working. The bottle is stuck, it's not turning, and suddenly you have to put more attention and try out different things until this stuck point is broken, and then your mind shifts back to the overall intention, and the body, life force follow mechanically. So this working of life force is as if under influence of mind can seize on it, intervene, program it, and stand back, and then the life force goes on habitually. And the condensation of the habit in the body becomes the long-term habit, which not only is built over decades of our physical life and settles even at a cellular level eventually, but from there it is that habit which imprints itself in the act of reproduction into the next generation. And so these habits also percolate, although originating in the mind, they condense all the way down to the physical, and then they seep into the next generation and move on in this way. So from a subjective perspective, it looks as if mind and life energy are the reality behind the body and body substance and body operations. And body is only a condensation of their working. So this is the truth behind. When we come to not only experience this, but master the physical life energy in this way, we are actually able to intervene by mind through life force on the body functions and play with them as easily as we would move our fingers. We can become conscious of our digestive process and shape its working as easily as we move fingers and shape our hands. But the key there is conquest of physical life energy. And mind then rules physical life energy. Through its perfection, the body simply follows because it is a condensation of that. So this is the importance that the Hatha Yogic approach has in the overall yogic science. Along with the attachment to the body and its works, the attachment to life in the body is overcome. So at this point, if the body is something so separate from the mind consciousness, only a condensation of the mind life energy working, the body could be taken up, molded, or even discarded, and a new one taken. And so the attachment to life in the body is no more so strong. For when we feel the physical being to be not ourselves, but only a dress or an instrument, the repulsion to the death of the body, which is so strong and vehement an instinct of the vital man, must necessarily weaken and can be thrown away. You feel yourself immortal, and the body itself being a vehicle, you can pick it up and drop it. You no more have the fear of death. It does not go in immediately, but it becomes weaker and weaker until at some point you can just ignore it and it doesn't matter. Thrown away it must be, and entirely. The fear of death and the aversion to bodily cessation are the stigma left by his animal origin on the human being. That brand must be utterly effaced. Now he doesn't say why. It's obvious it's part of the animal origin, so it has no use for the future. But there's something very deep here. Two things: fear of death and aversion to bodily cessation. So there's one thing which is more obvious, the fear of death. But just the cessation of the body, that the body will have to end at some point, you will have to drop it. And that has an aversion. It's not a fear, but an aversion to the idea. That is something more subtle and can stay for a long time. That also, he says, are stigma left by his animal origin on the human being. That brand must be utterly effaced. Two words he has used, stigma and brand. Stigma is a mark, but a mark in the body which goes deep. Brand also has a similar connotation, but it is an imprint coming from outside. Branding is what we do when we mark an animal. So an owner takes metal, heats it up, and presses the shape of the metal on an animal that he owns. For a moment, the flesh burns and the mark remains for life. The sense that the word branding carries is somebody from outside imposes their ownership on you, on the body, as a mark which stays with you for life. And it is a brand of the animal origin of the human being. So now if you think about the sense that it has, it is as if the past animal origin reaches out to the future humanity and brands upon it this fear of death. You belong to me. You belong to the domain of death, of ignorance, and not to the divine. So the question is, does our consciousness belong to that domain of inconscience or to the divine consciousness? And this is the brand left by the claim of the inconscience, the fear of death and aversion to bodily cessation. So the words he uses are so subtle and so powerfully revelative and must be utterly effaced, nothing left of that. Then only we can say, now we belong fully to the divine and to the new consciousness. So with this we now shift to the next chapter, where he takes up the working of the life force in the mind and then the release from the mind itself. The text practically continues. The release from the heart and the mind. But the ascending soul has to separate itself not only from the life in the body, but from the action of the life energy in the mind. It has to make the mind say, as the representative of the Purusha, I am not the life. The life is not the self of the Purusha. It is only a working, and only one working of Prakriti. So this is the stepping back of the consciousness, discarding identification with the body, and now discarding identification with the life. And what is it that makes for the life energy and it's working in us? So we saw the working in the body, and primarily it is all instinct of the physical survival and growth. But here comes a description of the essential character of life energy. The characteristics of life are: 1. Action and movement. 2. A reaching out to absorb and assimilate what is external to the individual. And 3. A principle of satisfaction or dissatisfaction in what it seizes upon or what comes to it, which is associated with the all-pervading phenomenon of attraction and repulsion. If you notice these three operations, you will find it everywhere in all living creatures. In conventional biology, they describe various indicators of life force, of living things. And they include most of the things which we read earlier: hunger, or reproduction, and needing to eat, to assimilate from outside, and so on. There were various classifications of life force, of living beings. But in all these you will find a limitation to forms which are animated and separate. They are not in a description of the life force in its working. And so that description is limited to living forms which are animate and which are separate. But what Sri Aurobindo does here, he goes to the root of it. And the root is the operation of life energy itself, irrespective of the form. And here we find something universal. In fact, he says, which is associated with these three things are everywhere in nature, because life is everywhere in nature. Now, if you look at the working of life force on levels which are not obviously animate as conscious beings, going down to the level of not even plant but stone, or lower than stone into molecule, atoms, you'll find these three things operating, even in subatomic particles. So first, if you take a subatomic particle, it is constantly in movement. It is always acting upon its environment and in movement. Second, it is always reaching out to absorb and assimilate what is external to it. So a particle is entering in relation to another particle, attaching or modifying itself or the other. And third, in that reaching out, there is a principle of satisfaction or dissatisfaction in what it seizes or what comes to it. It may not seize, but the other may seize it. And there is satisfaction or dissatisfaction, which takes the form of attraction and repulsion. So even two subatomic particles in their interaction may experience an attraction or a repulsion, but still there is an interaction between the two, one modifying the other. And this is operation of life energy in subatomic particle. Similarly, on the atomic level, you will find one atom influences another, reaches out, grabs an electron from the other and attaches itself to the other as a result, if it's sharing the electron, or it simply snatches and adds it to itself, the other is modified. And in the process, there is a movement of attraction or repulsion. You move higher up. Even a stone is doing this. Now, in a stone, you may not see obviously the action of the stone on things around it. But from the simple fact that the stone is pressing down by a weight on another stone or another object, at the point of the pressure, the stone begins to absorb what is outside it. It undergoes chemical modifications, or itself modifies the other thing which it is trying to absorb and assimilate. And the result is, at the point of contact, there is the creation of some modification even of molecules, of new materials, and so on. This now becomes more overt, more obvious in the plant, where a plant is actively reaching out to take in, and there is a like and a dislike, repulsion. Even as the plant becomes more animate, you touch the plant and the leaves move and pull away if they don't like that touch. Or a fly sits in the plant and the plant closes to take in the fly in order to eat it, and so on. Which then takes us to the animal domain. Sri Aurobindo points to the human. But in us mental beings, they are all given a mental value according to the mind which perceives and accepts them. So in the mental life of human beings also these three are happening. They're happening in the body life, but the mind life gives a mental value. You are sitting, you are bored, you reach out to grab a book, you reach out to make a call to somebody. But all of these are mental values. There is an action, a kinetic movement based on mental needs. Second is reaching out to assimilate what is external to the individual. When you read a book, you are taking in knowledge. When you are meeting people, you are interacting to know about them or to exchange energies, to feel comfortable, to feel energized, to feel excited, interested, and so on. And in all this, you have a satisfaction or dissatisfaction. At first, it was very interesting. After that, I got so bored, I wanted to run away. But these are all values which are given by the mind. And at any point, the same mind may change and say, you know what, I used to find that boring, now it is so interesting because my perspective has changed. So all these three operations of life force, we see all the way from the most lowest subatomic particle into the mind, but the mind gives characteristics which are purely of mental values. And everywhere it is life force. We could take also examples on scale. All these are small things. You could look at a planet and the way a planet interacts, the way a sun interacts, the way a galaxy interacts with other galaxies. And you'll find the same three principles operating there. But here the mental values are what Sri Aurobindo is going to focus on. They take the form of action, of desire, and of liking and disliking, pleasure and pain. So the first is action, driven by mind's interest. Second is desire, again driven by mind's interest. And the third is liking, disliking, or in its most extreme form, pleasure and pain. But even a mental pleasure is physical. The prana is everywhere in us, supporting not only the action of our body, but of our sense mind, our emotional mind, our thought mind, and bringing its own law or dharma into all these. It confuses, it limits, it throws into discord their right action and creates that impurity or misplacement and that tangled confusion which is the whole evil of our psychological existence. So now comes a very interesting analysis. What is it that is leading to this whole confusion in us? And it is the same prana operating. It's doing its own basic thing which it is doing at the level of a subatomic particle or in the plant or in the animal. It's doing the same thing in the human, but it's doing them on 4 different levels. And on each, it is bringing in its own characteristics. So he lists first, the action of prana is in the body. And we have seen already the actions. You are hungry, or you are tired, or you are healthy, or you are out of health, diseased, whatever form it may take. And then there is the sense mind. The mind reaching out through the senses to look upon the world or to act in the world. And at that point, the prana comes in and introduces its restlessness. I am looking and I cannot hold my attention is drifting all the time. Or it brings in the need to reach out and to take. I go closer, that is too loud, I move away. to take in, and then the values that it gives of like and dislike, but all at the level of the sense mind. Above that, the same prana is acting in the emotional mind. I like you, but right now the strong perfume that you're using repels me. So the sense mind is feeling a repulsion, the emotional mind is feeling an attraction, and the physical consciousness may have its own pulls or pushes. And you can see now at 3 different levels, the prana acting is producing completely different responses. And then on top of these 3 levels, there's the 4th operation of the thought mind. I have to discuss this very important project where we have to work together. I like you or I don't like you, whichever it is. And then I find an attraction or repulsion at the level of the senses. And then at a physical level, perhaps again there is a like or a dislike. And these 4 are operating differently. The same prana on operating on all of them gives completely different effects, and they all create a kind of a mishmash. But there is worse. With that, the prana introduces something else. The normal working of those levels get confused by these triple influences that the prana brings. So while the right action of the heart is to be able to feel love to all things, the prana brings into it like and dislike. And when the prana introduces dislike in the domain of love, I love to dislike you. I love to hate this person. I love to criticize and feel jealous, or whatever form it takes. And that's a perversion of what would have been a true movement of the love. Similarly, if it is the true action of the mind is to know what is true and to seek what is true, the prana brings in a confusion by disliking or liking certain things. For example, in the school, many children dislike a subject because the teacher is nasty to them. The subject itself might have been interesting if there was not this mixture of the emotional like or dislike. But separate from that, even the teacher is nice, the subject itself I learn to dislike because of the way it is taught, which makes it so complicated and difficult that I can't understand, and so I hate the subject. The same thing approached by a different teacher, making it simple and obvious and relevant, I love the subject. But what would have been a natural instinct to learn and to grow now becomes confused by this. So first it is bringing in confusion into the proper law and dharma of these different levels of consciousness by bringing its own law and dharma into it. And there's a mixture of dharmas, mixture of essential truths of their working. First it confuses. Second, it limits. We find this limiting most easily when the prana is weak. I want to learn so much, but I cannot. I get tired. I can't sit more than 10 minutes because my body gets uncomfortable. I can't hold my mind's attention for 2 minutes because my mind's tired. And if my mind is fresh and young and I can study now for hours, after a while, I need to stop in order for the mind to be able to assimilate, to settle, and to take time simply before I can move on to the next. Imagine now if the prana was clear, full, without limits, purely flowing to support the mind's working. You could in principle learn, absorb, assimilate at the same time, or even open out and take in a huge amount of information or knowledge, experience directly. As it is, we are only able to take bits at a time. So I went to a very interesting presentation, and there are only these things which I noticed I missed noticing because my energy could only be focused in a narrow band and could not expand to a much wider range of experience. So in all ways, the prana is bringing a limitation because of its own limitation. And finally, it throws into discord their right action and creates that impurity of misplacement. So So things are now shifted out because the prana brought in its value, and now the mind's value cannot operate as it should. And the tangled confusion, which is the whole evil of our psychological existence, all of these four levels, upon each the three kinds of variation that the prana can bring in, all tangle with each other and creates a huge mess. Four levels, three variations on each, three kinds of distortions above on each of them, and you can see it makes quite a large number, and each interacting with another, a tangle. You try to pull this, it pulls another, it's all got entangled. Which is the whole evil of our psychological existence. Now when you see this operating of the human being in a big tangle, you can't separate the threads. But you do notice one thing, there is a general tendency in this overall tangle. One thing which is common across all these levels, through all these tiny variations and their entanglements. And he says, in that confusion, one law seems to reign, the law of desire. You see this one common thread because the desire is the form in which all these three characteristics of life force are fulfilled in the mind. Desire involves action, movement, leads to action and movement. Desire involves reaching out to absorb and to assimilate. Desire involves satisfaction and dissatisfaction. So whatever the prana does, on whichever of these levels, the common element in all these is the element of desire. So Sri Aurobindo has brilliantly shown us a complex working here of prana operating in four levels of our consciousness, three of them mind, one of them in body. But across all of them, as the prana operates, the common feature is desire. In that confusion, one law seems to reign, the law of desire. As the universal divine being, all-embracing and all-possessing, acts, moves, enjoys purely for the satisfaction of divine delight, so the individual life acts, moves, enjoys and suffers predominantly for the satisfaction of desire. Therefore, the psychic life energy presents itself to our experience as a sort of desire mind, which we have to conquer if we mean to get back to our true self. The logic is so simple, it's so obvious when placed with this clarity. And this is the greatness of Sri Aurobindo's presentation. He does not simplify to show you a simplified version. Because simplified means you lose all the rich details and complexity, and when you have to apply to solve a problem, a simplified understanding is insufficient. He shows you in the full complexity what is happening. Nothing is left out. But then he puts in perspective and shows you what is the fundamental reality behind lower and higher and their relation. And he has brilliantly placed as in relation the divine truth and the distortion and limitation at our human individual level. And by putting them in relation, you see how the divine truth is reflected in the lower human operation. And what we have is a kind of a caricature, a parody of the divine truth now on the lower level. So you see similarities. And because of the similarities, it feels as if this lower caricature is the thing. To satisfy my desire is my fulfillment. It feels almost a birthright, even a divine truth. So it feels, if we have not experienced something higher. And so we fully enter into that instinct and that need to try to fulfill it, thinking this is it, this is what life is for. But it is a parody and it is a caricature. And if we want to get from here to there, the distortion has to be removed. And we have to conquer this thing which is distorting, the form of that distortion. And by its dissolution, by its removal, spontaneously the truth behind it will begin to act. The whole thing becomes so simple when you think of it this way. So we reread this. As the universal divine being, all embracing and all possessing, acts, moves, enjoys purely for the satisfaction of divine delight. So what is the divine being's motive? Satisfaction of the divine delight. And the divine delight is not based on a lack. It is not therefore desire driven. It is not based on a restlessness of habit. And it is in its origin in a foundation of peace. And the satisfaction of the divine delight is not dependent on things. It is in itself complete always. And so when it enjoys, the satisfaction is inherent, whether the enjoyment involves what to life energy would be attraction or repulsion. There is always a satisfaction, and there is neither attraction nor repulsion. There is pure enjoyment, and whatever the experience is duality. So the divine being, unlike desire, does not experience separateness from its object. It is all embracing, all possessing, and the object which it enjoys is itself felt a part of it. It acts, moves, enjoys for the satisfaction of divine delight. And the whole thing is a play of the delight. But the individual life experiences separateness. It is not all embracing, it is not all possessing. It sees everything as not itself. As not itself, it also sees everything as opposed to itself. Some things are opposed, but they are small enough and weak enough that I can overcome the opposition. And so there I am comfortable in overcoming the opposition and absorbing and assimilating. But when the same thing is too strong or too great for me to oppose, for me to overcome the opposition, then my attempt fails. There is a frustration. There is even the reversal. I feel overwhelmed by the other. I feel I will lose my separateness of self. Therefore I fear. I run away from, or I experience pain in contact with this other. So both pain and pleasure emerge because of the sense of separateness, and in the separateness, the comfort or discomfort, or the safety or not of the contact. When it is safe and I am able to take in, it is pleasurable. When it is unsafe and I feel overwhelmed, it is painful. So the individual life acts, moves, enjoys, and suffers, which is not there in the divine being. This is the additional element. Divine being also acts, moves, enjoys. Individual life acts, moves, enjoys. But additionally, it suffers. But all the while, predominantly for the satisfaction of desire. And so we are looking at behind us the divine being which is acting, moving, enjoying for divine delight. But here in the individual consciousness, which is now experiencing itself separate from, unable to participate in the all-embracing, all-possessing divine being and its universality, this individualized, fragmented life acts, moves, enjoys with the drive of desire. Because that's the only common feature across all these levels of life force operating in us. It's obvious what needs to be done. Therefore, the psychic life energy presents itself to our experience as a sort of desire mind which we have to conquer if we mean to get back to our true self. As long as this desire mind operation is continuing, we cannot get back to our true self, and to the universal divine being and its enjoyment and satisfaction of divine delight. And to conquer this, first step, disengage from its current operations. Then one may recast it in truer operations. He uses this word psychic life energy, and we have to be careful to understand the vocabulary here. It has nothing to do with the inmost psychic being. It is the word psychic used in the conventional sense of something which do with domain of life force, as in psychic phenomena. It is in that sense that he uses the word psychic, of the psyche, but as in first layer, not the inmost. So the desire operation of life energy appears to us like a desire mind. And now if you observe yourself and the superficial character of your individuality, of your self, surface soul, you notice you are fond of this desire mind. But the thinking itself is largely driven by the desire. Desire is your primary motivation and your only reason for living. So this is now the description next. Desire is at once the motive of our actions, our lever of accomplishment, and the bane of our existence. If our sense mind, emotional mind, thought mind could act free from the intrusions and importations of the life energy, if that energy could be made to obey their right action instead of imposing its own yoke on our existence, all human problems would move harmoniously to their right solution. It's so simple. As long as life energy is driving the mind's layers, you have all the problems and the consequent suffering. If you reverse it, and rather these principles operate and life energy only support and follow them without interfering with its own drives, then he says everything would move harmoniously to the right solution. Each of these layers would operate according to their true need and their true character, fulfilling their truth. And naturally they would be in harmony. But the situation right now is that life energy drives mind. And it has these three characteristics of the desire. Desire is at once. We act when we have a desire. Consider a person who is also living so much in his mind that he ignores social norms, physical needs, ignores his food. And there are many people like that when they are in the domain of research. Often we see this in people who are reading a novel, playing games on the video where only the mind is involved, or when they are doing some research or writing something. They're so identified with the mind that everything else begins to fade away, is unimportant. You ask them to do something, it's not interesting. Even it may be in the extreme that a person neglects food and sleep because it's boring. It is a distraction. I'd rather keep doing this very interesting, enjoyable thing where my mind is involved. And the only way you can get the person to break free now is when there is a strong enough desire which pulls you in the other direction. Otherwise, this one-pointed desire fulfilling the mind's interest can even ignore all the rest. Or you remove even that. A person is sitting idle. I don't need to learn anything. I don't need to interact with people. I'm happy. I'm content to be by myself. And he would stay there and do nothing until perhaps even the whole process of life would break down. And that's where life kicks in and drives people. So the first emergence out of matter, a life establishes desire as the primary driving force to break out of the inertia of the material existence. And it brings in kindness of the rajas through the desire. If you have I'm recalling an incident which I was told when I was visiting Orissa. One of the government officers who had worked to develop the state and its economic and social condition, he was narrating how they had gone to some of the extreme interior regions where people had a very simple, regulated life. They lived their life in a basic comfort until a problem came, and then they were helpless. They were unprepared. So it was part of their intention to train people to become independent financially. They taught them how to make 2 crops every year instead of 1 crop. 1 crop was just enough to take care of their food needs. 2 crop would create an excess, and the excess could be sold in the market, from which they would get benefit for other comforts and so on. But also, if 1 crop failed, you had a backup of the 2nd crop, so you would never go hungry. So they trained them to do 2 crops in the year cycle. People were very happy. They were very grateful to the government officers, thanked them profusely. And when the government officers checked a year later, they found the people going back to their original cycle of 1 crop per year. And when there was a breakdown in the crop, there was famine. And they came back and said, well, why don't you do 2 crops? There was no reason. It was just too much trouble to make that extra crop just in case there is a failure of the crop after. And what's the point of going and selling to get more benefits? It's not necessary. And the officer was expressing great frustration. Interestingly, in the more recent times, all that has changed. And the change has come through the drive of desire that advertisements have brought in. Suddenly, advertisements have begun to provoke people, awaken desires which they didn't have, for needs of things they don't need. But now, once the desire is acting, now everybody wants more and more money by any means. Of course, the tendency of inertia is do the least to get the maximum money. And of course, it's easy then to play around with things which are not so useful. So the drive of desire becomes the prime motivator of our actions, and for good reason at the initial stage. Our lever of accomplishment. When you want to accomplish something, you want to have a strong desire, then you can achieve something great. If your desire is weak, you can't do great things. So even in certain systems, they teach you to have more desire, ask you to exaggerate desires. And this is the current paradigm of management training, where the management schools, particularly in the West, and the Indian schools follow the same framework now. You should never be satisfied, because the moment you're satisfied, you'll stop making effort, and therefore you should move from dissatisfaction to greater dissatisfaction, all the way to the top. Of course, they don't say it. Eventually you collapse from exhaustion, and then you're successful. But the drive to accomplish great things is also seen to be primarily a drive of desire. And as a result, you have frustration, you have exhaustion, and you have even the complete negation, the dislike and even hatred of those very things which you desire when you fail to achieve them. And a sharp turning away from life in its most extreme form, saying, I am fed up with this life. And the bane of our existence, because of the immense suffering that desire leads us to. And desire is at once all these 3 things. So sense mind, emotional mind, thought mind, if they could be free of the intrusions and importations of this life energy brings its own baggage into them. Instead, rather, if the life energy obeys their needs, obeying their right action, then all human problems would move harmoniously to their right solution. The proper function of the life energy is to do what it is bidden by the divine principle in us, to reach to and to enjoy what is given to it by that indwelling divine, and not to desire at all. And this is the right functioning of life force, for which we have to go through a training, a complete reversal of the priorities which we have inherited from our animal instinct. If the animal did not have a strong desire, it would sit in its nest as the little bird, happy to be fed, happy to be alive, and when nothing is coming, happy to just sit and sink and die. It is the drive of desire which makes it reach out, and when it doesn't get enough food, makes it leap out, makes it fly, makes it pursue the whole journey of its life. It is that which has brought us to where we are. And so we have a whole baggage going back of some billion years of evolution, where desire has been our prime driver. Life energy pushing as desire. And now we are asked to change this role and teach the life energy to follow after what it is asked to do, to reach to and enjoy what is given to it, and without any desire. So you can see how there's a major shift required. And now he describes what these different levels of mind are meant properly to do. The sense mind, what it is meant to do, and life energy should support that. The emotional mind, and equally the thought mind. And this goes across the next 2.5 paragraphs. So we can quickly view it so that we get an overall sense. We will look at these more deeply. The proper function of the sense mind is to lie open passively, luminously, to the contacts of life, and transmit their sensations and the rasa or right taste and principle of delight in them to the higher functions. So if the sense mind is simply allowed to do its function, it opens to the whole universe. Wow, it's so beautiful. And everything comes in and simply flows through to the higher gradations of consciousness. And itself is passive, because the moment you grab this, you don't want that. There is a split and there's a distortion in the perception. So there's no reaching out, it is passive. But the passivity is not a dark passivity of sleep. It is lit up, conscious, fully aware, intensely aware, luminously. So the light here is the light of awareness, bright, fresh. And it is open to the contacts of life. Life is playing out, this huge universe, and the life in it is playing out and putting out its imprints, which it receives and transmits. The sensation and the rasa, right taste, principle of delight. Now this is a very simple exercise you can try, and it is accessible to all of us without too much effort. Preferably do this in a beautiful space or a natural space, a space of nature, garden for example, where there are plants and trees. May not be in bloom with flowers, but doesn't matter. And there you observe, quiet yourself, basic quietness of mind, emotions, and then relax the senses and simply become aware of the whole screen without giving value to anything, any form or any part. So it's like you're seeing on one big screen all of life forms. You don't say this is tree, that is stone. You just see this is brown, that is brown. This is green, that is yellow. That's all. Just a rich layering of a play of colors, and everything equally. And then look at forms without giving them mental values. So you look at a form which is a flower. You don't say whether it is faded or fresh, whether beautiful or ugly. No value is given to it. Even a faded flower which has become brown, observe its form and its colors and notice the shades and the lines, and it's actually beautiful. There's a joy to it. Look at the bloom flower, observe its colors and lines, a different joy to it. And in this way, you play with observing each of the parts, forms, with no value given to it. And you will find there's a kind of a delight in just observing the rich shades of colors, lines, forms, and the way they play out with each other. And here you will experience what would be the natural sense of rasa in the sense mind. And nowhere any values are given. Everything is a joy to watch. This is what very small children tend to experience spontaneously. Of course, as long as you're in the domain of no danger. The moment there's something dangerous or painful, all those other values, the life force has the attraction, repulsion, and so on. In this natural, quiet enjoyment of things, we tend to introduce exaggerations to the children. You ring a bell, oh, look at this, and you laugh. And so the child is taught to give this more importance. You give a bright toy, and now all the other simple things of life are not so interesting. This is so much more active, dramatically. And after a while, the child starts seeking strong, sensational provocations as the only way for enjoyment. But if you did nothing else and just let the child be, you'll find him observing minutely the ant moving around. You will find him noticing a particular leaf and getting lost in its shape or in its smell. And there is a fascination for everything. If you did nothing else, eventually he will outgrow this, because other parts of the consciousness quickly kick in and want to fulfill their interests. And once they come in, their interest is pure action. So the emotions give value to things which taste stronger. I remember still as a child in kindergarten, I had once, by some mistake, bit into a green chili. And there was such a strong association of green with discomfort. I'd even forgotten the pain of chili, but green somehow had an association. And I remember it was my birthday, and my mother had put some grapes in a sweet dish. And I refused to eat it because of the green. And they kept saying, oh, it's good, it is nice, but I remember saying no, 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 and crying because it was not acceptable. And I remember that I did not know why. It was just that green thing. Now here is in the mind of the child 2 or 3 layers operating, and the child is not conscious of what it is. There's no clear memory of it, just a reaction that comes. And you don't understand why. And even the adults don't understand why. But that's the actions, the capacities and incapacities of the life energy in the body. It is, to begin with, limited in its scope, and secondly, forced in these limits to associate itself with all these discords of the life in matter. So let's say I'm enjoying this beautiful sunrise in this way, purely with the sense mind. And you can see it is just a joy to be, and you don't give any particular importance to any particular thing. But after a while, the sun is too bright. It begins to hurt my eyes. The wind is too cold. I feel a chill, because life energy can't handle that intensity. On a television screen, when you're watching something, the light is too bright in one corner. It hurts your eyes. With the remote, you can reduce the contrast or the brightness. Make the picture more even. The intensity of the black and white become less. And now suddenly I can appreciate the same picture much more. I go out at midday, maybe in a beautiful scene, there's a mountain and there's a valley and there's a waterfall, but the light is so bright it hurts my eyes. I have to look like that and I want to get away from the heat of it. Instead, I put the dark glasses, everything is dimmed, and now the whole scene is much more enjoyable. I'm able to stay there for a long time with a bit of umbrella to shade, and I can sit there and enjoy it. What prevented the enjoyment? A life force unable to take intensity. You'll see with age this happens. Little children at night, when the contrast is higher with car headlights, you can see things on the road dimly, and there's a bright car headlight, you can still see your way because the range that the eye can handle is much larger. With age, it cannot. The range narrows. Now when the car headlight hits me, I get blinded by it. I cannot see anymore the road. What has happened is the narrowing of the range of sight. Youth had a wider range. With age, it has got narrowed. And the same with hearing. The fainter things I cannot hear, so everything amplified. If it's too loud, it weakens further my hearing and so on. And it's all to do with life force and the bodily action of the life force. So, and with it, all the acceptance, refusal, satisfaction, dissatisfaction, because the attraction, so he describes the chain. First, attraction and repulsion. This hurts, so you repel. This is comfortable, you're attracted. With that comes acceptance and refusal. So things which are comfortable, I accept. Things which are not, I refuse. So I'm already breaking up the reality. And finally, from there, satisfaction and dissatisfaction. If you impose on me what I refuse, I am dissatisfied. If you take away from me what I accept, I am dissatisfied. If you give me what I want, I am satisfied. If you take away from what I don't want, I am satisfied. And reversal. All these values now are distorting the enjoyment of the rasa. Capacity and incapacity in the body, everything gets limited in scope and forced in these limits to associate itself with all these discords of life and matter. Now that you've been reduced to limits, you have to still associate all the likes, dislikes, and the discords. It becomes an instrument for pleasure and pain instead of for delight of existence. You see, the delight which was there originally, where you had an equal appreciation of everything, has now been turned into, this gives me pleasure, that gives me pain, and I'm now, my whole behavior gets warped to seek pleasure and to avoid pain. And this is sense mind. On the next, sense mind feeds the experience of life. There is the emotional mind. So, similarly, the emotional mind, compelled to take note of all these discords and subject itself to their emotional reactions, becomes a hurtling field of joy and grief, love and hatred, wrath, fear, struggle, aspiration, disgust, likes, dislikes, indifferences, content, discontent, hopes, disappointments, gratitude, revenge, and all the stupendous play of passion, which is the drama of life in the world. This chaos we call our soul. This is the surface soul, the desire soul. But what's the real operation behind of the emotional mind, and what is the true soul? He describes shortly. But you see how, at this point, all this pain, pleasure, impulse coming in, the emotional mind gives to it an emotional response. When I have pleasure, I am happy. When I have pain, I have this shrinking, fear, hatred. And when you repeatedly give me pain, I have anger. I struggle to pull away. And overall, when everything is in harmony and pleasurable, I am content. When the pleasure is denied for no satisfactory reason, I have discontent, disappointment, and so on. The stupendous play of passion which is the drama of life in the world. And if you notice, a normal human being enjoys this drama and feels that I'm living life when I am having this drama. This we call our soul. If you didn't have this drama, you'll feel life empty, meaningless. Even you will find people, when they are too bored, they seek out drama. They will enter in engagement to provoke somebody just to create some emotional drama, or seek out drama through reading of a novel or watching of a movie, because that's what makes you feel alive. And there's an identification with this emotional drama and a feeling of alive. The more extreme, the more vibrant, the more varied this drama. In the younger generations today, where they've already got sufficiently desensitized to finer things, you will see them going to a discotheque. And for what? A person who is sensitive may enter that space and find it too intense, too loud, too noisy, too chaotic, strong smells, strong bright lights, and strong excitement of emotions and energies. And it is almost chaotic and repulsive to somebody who's refined and sensitive. But somebody who's been dulled needs that to feel alive, to feel as if, now we did something, we had so much fun, it was so great, it was so wonderful. And then you come back in exhaustion, try to recover until your exhaustion recovers. Till then you cannot do much, and then again now you crave for some more excitement, and always building to greater and greater extremes, until even the biology is unable to contain it and begins to get damaged. Your hearing is damaged, your nervous system is weakened, and so on. And it is a vicious cycle that pulls you into something. But the play of passion is what gives the sense of enjoyment. Consider what makes a movie enjoyable, successful for the masses. You see, an artistic movie, which is fine emotions, subtle suggestions, is not a hit in the conventional framework of the human interest. What is it that makes a movie a hit? When there is strong emotion, passion, drama, excitement, great hopes, breaking down, tensions, attractions, repulsions, that makes it dramatic. You dim all the extremes, make for subtle, fine nuances, people will say, oh, that was boring. I remember there was a movie which had come out recently. It was called Bombay Dreams. I think that was the name. It was done by a director who is extraordinary in his art. He tried to set up a mood which, first of all, did not match the Indian psyche. It was something which was as if from the 40s of Hollywood. But he set it up in the Bombay context. And there were elements of gangster and some kind of dreams and ideals. Very finely nuanced, beautifully made. As an art, it was brilliant. I would even say outstanding. But as an element of common interest to life, it was so boring. And it was a complete flop. And the man was very disappointed because he was waiting for people to appreciate his art and he couldn't do it. And of course, if you want a movie to succeed, you can't make it too artistic. You have to make it acceptable to this need of the drama, this chaos we call our soul. And we feel alive when we have it. But the real soul, real psychic entity, which for the most part we see little of, and only a small minority in mankind has developed, is an instrument of pure love, joy, and the luminous reaching out to fusion and unity with God and our fellow creatures. This psychic entity is covered up by the play of the mentalized prana or desire mind, which we mistake for the soul. The emotional mind is unable to mirror the real soul in us, the divine in our hearts, and is obliged instead to mirror the desire mind. So the emotional mind is this domain which now ends up reflecting the desire mind, the desire-driven mind values, when in fact its job was to reflect the real soul in us, the divine in our hearts, which has characteristics, he says, is an instrument of pure love, joy, and a luminous reaching out to fusion and unity with God and our fellow creatures. So this underlying sense of oneness and the play of that oneness, the joy and the love which is causeless, ahaituka is the term in Sanskrit, without needing any external cause, simply to feel that in the contact with things of life and to express that in your actions in life, and that is its satisfaction. You see this again briefly in very young children. When they watch a bird flying and it is fascinating and they laugh and they're happy, and they watch the ant moving and they're fascinating and they're happy. So at that point, this emotional mind is taking the rasa of the sense mind and enjoying it, and there is this sense of everything being beautiful, even very subtly, not consciously, a sense of the sacred which one feels. And from the child, the love for all creatures. He sees this little creature, he reaches out, but there is naturally a love. Once the child has experienced fear or has been taught by strong responses to dislike, to hate, to react, to express disgust, then all these things begin very quickly to cover up this thing which was naturally there before. So the emotional mind's job is to mirror the real soul in us. Instead, it is obliged to mirror the desire mind, because the psychic entity is covered up by the play of the mentalized prana. And now the only thing available which can give some play of the emotions is the desire mind. If now the desire mind is quieted and it allows the deeper soul in us to emerge, or its influence to reflect, then it is much more satisfying, fulfilling in every way for the emotions. But as a first step, we have to teach the emotional mind to disengage from this desire mind and its drama and turn inwards. So first there is a disengagement, a step of boredom. Now suddenly you're asked to become quiet and not have all these exciting emotions. Get rid of all the drama and become peaceful and quiet. Okay, it feels nice for a while. Momentarily there's some distant reflection of the inner. I feel good, I feel relaxed, but I get bored. So you have to teach the emotional mind to not get bored from lack of excitement. And then it takes a while before it can begin to feel things of the inner. If the emotional mind has been coarsened, then even the psychic influence, though satisfying, leaves you lacking something. You want excitement, you want agitation, you want the play of contrasts and contradictions. And so it turns back to its old habit. A little bit of the inner and a lot of the outer, and that is a perfect balance. So there is a whole process even of the purifying of the emotional mind to teach it now to turn to the psychic primarily, and then from there to be able to bring out with great power and intensity the influences of the psychic, the pure love, the pure joy, and the luminous reaching out to fusion and unity can have intensities, even far greater intensities than the emotional drama, but no more chaotic. And then expressions of emotions are infused with this, and the emotions can play, but now in their true expression, not in their distorted expression of which are primarily reaction based. So the character of this transformed emotional mind is that all of its drives, even in expression of emotions, are not dependent on external things. They are causeless. And when external things become a reference point, they become a focus on which a certain play of emotions can work out, the joy is still causeless. The object is only a vehicle for a particular form of emotional expression. So I may, for example, experience a kind of a hope to achieve something, a kind of a disappointment from its failure, but it is not a personal disappointment. It is not an emotional reaction. It is, oh, it didn't work out. What do we do? How do we try it? And you move in a different way, a new approach. And it is an experiment, it is a playing out. The emotions have their place, but now they are valued completely differently and their base is different. Not the passion of life force pulling, pushing dramatically, but the free streaming of the soul's joy. And this now feeds the next level, which is the thought mind. So too, the proper function of the thought mind is to observe, understand, judge with a dispassionate delight in knowledge, and open itself to messages and illuminations playing upon all that it observes, and upon all that is yet hidden from it, but must progressively be revealed. Messages and illuminations that secretly flash down to us from the divine oracle concealed in light above our mentality. Whether they seem to descend through the intuitive mind or arise from the seeing heart. But this it cannot do rightly because it is pinned to the limitations of the life energy in the senses, to the discords of sensations and emotions, and to its own limitations of intellectual preference, inertia, straining, self-will, which are the forms taken in it by the interference of this desire mind, this psychic prana. So we see here the right functioning, which we will review in detail shortly, is the right functioning of the thought mind, and instead it finds itself entangled with, pinned to the limitations of life energy in the senses and discords of sensations and emotions, the two lower levels. And their limitations are affecting it, and its own limitations coming of intellectual preference, inertia, straining, self-will, which are the distortions the prana has brought into its own level. Now, at all three levels now, you have this distortion which life energy has brought. As is said in the Upanishads, our whole mind consciousness is shot through with the threads and currents of this prana, this life energy that strives and limits, grasps and misses, desires and suffers. And only by its purification can we know and possess our real and eternal self. So this thought mind, its function is to know the self. But instead of knowing the self, it finds itself completely shot through with these currents of prana operating directly on it and through the two lower levels upon which it is dependent for its perceptions. And so this whole paragraph of the thought mind we will look at in more detail next time. But now you have a picture of great complexity. 3 levels. Upon each of these levels, the prana is bringing in its distortions. Each lower level, its higher level with its distortions, further disrupting the mixture that the prana itself has brought as a distortion. And then the top levels further reach down and influence with their confusion those levels. And all this is happening because the prana is streaming in and distorting what would have been the normal functions of these 3 levels. The easiest way you can solve it, get rid of the prana, bring everything to quietness. And that's the way by which the normal method of yoga, which is life renouncing, takes. Shut down all these distractions from your life. Isolate yourself, walk away to the forest. Most of the desire impulses which reach out to you through the senses would be taken away from you. simplify life to the minimum, remove even these of the emotions and senses to the minimum. The thought itself is turned to dwell only on the divine. And all of this confusion is greatly simplified so that the consciousness can disengage and withdraw. As an exercise, this would be useful for us, but it would not be in itself an end, because we want now each of these levels to be cleared of the distortions. We want the life energy now to operate as a servant of each of these gradations of consciousness, and each consciousness now to operate freely as it should to fulfill its task, so that the smile can give you the delight, the emotional mind can enjoy the soul's delight, and the intellectual mind, the thought mind, can perceive the divine in things. And all these three, now relating to the divine, can enter the full play of life and experience the truth of life in this way. This being the goal, we cannot simply withdraw, except momentarily to teach a new habit. You may stop all this clutter, bring peace and silence into all these parts, in order now to teach them to operate differently. And you may start bit by bit to re-engage with life, to reconnect upon the basis of a new value. That would make sense. But we want eventually in life to be able to know the world in the right way and enjoy it in the right way. So Sri Aurobindo will next describe, in continuation of this logic, in what way to resolve this knot. The core of the knot is in the sense of separateness of the ego, as we will see, and the need for the consciousness to disengage first from identification with these layers, and then the correction that is required. So we can pause here.
I feel like in this talk you have given actually a cure for this scourge of terrorism. I don't know if you're aware of what happened in France. Yes. So it was really struck me that one sentence I took note that he said, when you repeatedly give me pain, I have anger. So I was thinking, this naturally the governments of the world, along in France and President Obama and all of them, the idea is to get tough on the terrorists and try to destroy. But actually, nobody's got the wisdom to look at the psychological root of what is causing this. It reminded me that they were at the end of the fireworks, and there was this beautiful display of color, and then suddenly this vehicle comes and is swerving from side to side and killing people. And I thought nobody is looking and asking themselves, what is the psychology of the person and people behind this? Because they said that in Paris, there are like ghettos of these Middle Eastern men. This fellow was from Tunisia. And these people are settling there, but they're not accepted, they're not absorbed into society. I think a day will come that they will take a psychological approach to cure this, because the military one doesn't seem to be working.
Yes. Of course, the situation is much more complex when you're dealing with this kind of terrorism, where it is not merely an anger. The person, and we have seen many examples of this, people very wealthy and comfortable in their own lives choose to leave that life and join some terrorist organization to kill people for reasons which have no connection with their comfort or with their happiness. It was some crazy blind belief in a warped ideology. And so it's not just that there is a physical discomfort or an anger from some wrong which is done. There is an ideology which is perverted. So, yes, so the point being, you need to act on all these levels. To get rid of these distortions in human life, one has to operate on all these levels, including the ideology itself, which teaches you that by killing others you will get rewarded in heaven. That needs to be questioned and changed.
Yes, but isn't there one other aspect that relates to what you talked about tonight, is that the whole problem of the senses.
Yes.
They don't like the sense indulgence of the West.
Mhm.
That's one thing that they would like.
But again, that's a belief that it is wrong because it does not fit your ideological thinking. Just because somebody enjoys themselves drinking alcohol and your training tells you that that is bad, you don't need to go and kill them. You can say, fine, you have your alcohol, I will have my whatever thing I like. That idea is not somehow brought into the ideology.
They have not been taught about the
Correct.
refinement of the senses.
Exactly.
That is totally missing, I think, in their upbringing.
Yes. And the problem here is primarily an ideology which teaches you to think in black and white, which actually teaches you that you will be rewarded by killing others. There are many who dislike what they would consider an indulgent lifestyle, even based on other religions, but they don't end up wanting to kill those who follow an indulgent lifestyle. You see? And if that was the case, truly that their reaction was because of some what they consider a corrupt lifestyle, then you attack or engage with those who are following that lifestyle. You don't catch a bunch of people who are enjoying fireworks and kill them. That doesn't make sense. So the whole thing is very irrational and driven not by a real problem, but by a perverted teaching and even a perverted force which uses that teaching to possess people's minds to cause chaos. So the point being, we have to address all levels. We can't just say this one thing is the cause.
But Sridharu, isn't it also a disease in the Western? So they need these strong sensations.
It is true. It is a disease. It is a very sad thing increasingly, and it's not just in the West now, it's spreading all over the world, that young children are being exposed to very strong, aggressive sense stimuli, which dull and harden their deeper sensitivities and even increase this covering. What Sri Aurobindo has described here, that the the emotional mind is unable to mirror the real soul and is obliged to mirror the desire mind, because the things of the real soul have got covered by the play of the mentalized prana and desire mind, which we mistake for the soul. And this covering is being thickened and strengthened by certain lifestyles which are becoming more and more common in the world. There's a real danger in that, comments on this, that there's even a possibility that humanity may go so extremely in this direction that it may lose even its spiritual thread of contact and completely destroy itself. That is a real danger. And there's a small minority which is not only able to avoid this, but where the soul is conscious enough to assert itself to reject these influences. But it's too small still. The hope is that somewhere along the way in the larger masses, there will be an awakening which will say this is harming us and we need to correct it.
I mean, I see this as a necessary cleansing in a way. You know, I mean, we shouldn't say this too loud, but I mean, then I see, I mean, how those people, who are war, invalids, or whatever, suffer. I mean, you can almost, see what they're doing now. How do they suffer in the next life to come? Because, I mean, it's not done. Somehow it's a huge cleansing operation to prepare the whole earth, to clean it, and it is necessary. I mean, it's very cool. It's very cool, but it just, all that stuff comes up. And once somehow people make, I mean, you can see everything now. Everything is openly there. You know what's happening, and people make up their minds whether they want to be part of it or not. And it's few people who are fighting this. Right? I mean, the oppression of women, and we go back to the Middle Age, and stoning of adultery, and I mean all this kind of nonsense, which has to stop, and it has to stop, and it has to first come into people's face so they can see it. it was for centuries. People suffered. They had to say anything else there. The internet page and so this will stop. It will take some time, but
Yes.
it's stop. Then it's necessary. It takes this kind of forms. And on the other side, this is not meaning, right? Just for mind from progressing. Because it really happened. There's nothing to stop it, not even this. It's just like the wars, which was so fluid and all that. And they couldn't stop it. It went on. Not as maybe, I hope not any more the World War, but this is our next,
And what you say about cleansing, I think that is the thing, that it's making people stop wanting these strong sensations in the artistic things they create. Because it's like if they don't have violence, they put it on the screen. Because that need for strong sensation, because it has to be motivated from the soul. The art has to come from there.
As uncomfortable as it may sound, there is a truth to this idea that there's a cleansing taking place, even in the terrorism. What has happened is, not only it has got exposed, everybody can see it for its most coarse form, but also there is increasing polarization. Those who seek that kind of life, belief, are moved to come together, and those who refuse it are separating and distancing themselves from it, almost a kind of a clear separation between two extremes, which is a sign that the perversion, whatever form and strength it may seem to have, is now being isolated in order to be evicted from evolution. And that will happen one way or other. Yes.
One thing I like that President Obama said, that he made this statement during this the ceremony for the Dallas policeman for him. So he said, let's try to put ourselves in the other person's shoes. Now this is with the terrorism, I think this is missing, because they're always saying, we're innocent, we're so innocent, and these people have common debtors on us. Well, I understand why they feel that way, but on the other hand, they're not completely innocent, because this Charlie Hebdo thing, they made cartoons against Muhammad, which infuriated people. And then, for example, they were so charitably taking in refugees, but they weren't allowing them to work. Work is as much a psychological need as food and water, isn't it? So
it is a complex. Yes. There are two things. One is a social problem, a socio-economic problem which can be dealt with. That is doable. But then there is this dimension of a perverted belief system, an ideology, which is quite separate from the social economic problem, but feeds on it and even provokes it. And so we have to look at these two as separate. If the ideology is removed, the social economic problem is solvable. The ideology itself is not solvable. You cannot argue because it is irrational. You cannot teach it that the others are your brothers, understand from the other people's point of view, because it refuses. And so at that point, either the ideology itself has to break down internally, or it has to be removed. One of these will happen, one way or other.
Said that there's a multi-fraternity. Fraternity should have been put first.
Yes.
And that's what's missing, because look what happened to how the French, but how they treated the refugees when they came to that place they call the jungle. You see, they didn't even make it decent for human beings. And so, unless they look on them as human beings instead of problems, that's why I'm really praying to Mother that man from Portugal gets the top UN job, because he was 10 years he cared for refugees.
Also, in these situations, when you're looking at the problem in Europe, there are also complexities of karmic entanglements. Many of these countries in Europe entered other countries for their own interests, created instabilities, and then now are having to deal with those instabilities as their problems. And there's a whole karmic entanglement there also. But it's a complex thing. If we recognize at least certain core issues and separate them from the rest, which is a more socio-economic issue, then involved. Right now, in the public mind, all these things are mixed. There's a lot of confusion.
thing, if I may say, if you remember back at Boston Marathon bomb, I don't know if you know the story of this man. He was living in America happily for quite a while, and then he became a boxer, and he entered a tournament, and he won the tournament, and he was so proud of himself and thrilled at it, but they wouldn't give him the prize because he was not an American citizen. And that's when he turned into a jihadi. So you see, but the Americans don't want to side of the top of their fault. They think they're innocent. Are they innocent? I don't think so.
These are complex.
That's what I want to say. There are two sides to the thing. I'm not justifying what the terrorists are doing, but I can understand why they're lashing out.
So, Mother has said one place, by reading it looks very, very simple. I'm not able to visualize the whole thing. That is, the corrupted human mind. There are three parts. One is a corrupted part of humanity. Second is the animal part. Third is the supramental part. So, she said that the corrupted part of humanity will disappear like all the species have disappeared. Whatever, even no animal can do. Man, forget about man. But no animal will do. That will evaporate from this.
It's an interesting description Mother has of this transition. Yes. But how long it will take, we cannot say. But just to summarize what she said. So in the human consciousness, yes, in the human consciousness now, you see an upward part which is rising. You see a part which is descending into something which is corrupt, perverse, almost inhuman, and even not acceptable at an animal consciousness. But there's something in between, which is neither rising nor falling, but just trying to stay. And this part, she says, will subside eventually to some level of comfort, which is of a thinking animal. The corrupt part, of course, perverse part will fade out because it has no meaning and it is a perversion. But the other humanity, which does not rise, will actually lapse back. There's a kind of a peak of the intellect that humanity has come to, which is it is unable to sustain. From here, it has to either move up or sink back. So one part will actually sink back as another part moves up, and the kind of a gap forms. So this is what she has described as the evolutionary transition. Of course, we can't say whether this will happen in 1 or 2 generations or it will take dozens of generations.
That is the unfruitful attempt of nature.
Yes, yes.
Except for is unfruitful.
And this is the point Sri Aurobindo makes, even if you look at it purely in terms of levels of consciousness. At the level of the intellect, we can rest. You have the thinking man, he is happy to think and live as a scientist, philosopher, artist, whatever it is in the rational mental domain. But when you rise above and you enter the domain of intuition, there are gradations in between which are unstable. You cannot stay in them long enough. From there, either you move up or you move down. So those levels will not, currently you have humanity rising into those levels. They cannot stay. So either from there they lapse back to thinking animal human, or they rise upward. So there will be a gap always. Because those levels of consciousness inherently don't have a self-sustaining base. They depend on something higher. Even Sri Aurobindo says the intellect by itself has no reason to exist. A person who lives purely by logic and thought will look around and logically there is nothing which is meaningful because everything can be disproved or proved according to how you look at logic. Everything has value or not. Everything is right or wrong. What do you do? What do you follow? So logical mind necessarily has to serve either the senses or some ideal. Logic cannot serve itself. And therefore, the logical mind turns to satisfaction of sensory desire or it turns to realization of higher ideals. And there's this always separation that comes. Logic has to serve another.
These two are explained, but this evocation is not.
What is that?
Evocation of this
Okay.
corrupted human mind,
Yes,
evocation.
yes.
That is not.
Yes. Mother explains that the peak of intellectual development is the power of the intellect to deceive itself. Obviously, it cannot continue to deceive itself because by self-deception, eventually it has to collapse. So that's where it breaks down. So that peak of intellect, where you can be completely deceiving yourself and believing that you're right, that capacity, that will break down. And you'll fall back to a power of the mind, but not to this extent, which is a perversion.
Second is this rasavarjam rasopasya param drashtva nivartam. Rasavarjam rasopasya param
Yes.
drashtva. So actually, in that context, it's, what that says is when you see the param, then automatically this fades away. But here, again, we have to make some effort to do that. So people get clarity.
So there is this idea that the moment you have a glimpse of something higher, then automatically things which so far were interesting for you lose their interest. The problem is to have that first glimpse of the higher. In order to have that, either there has to be a sufficient quieting of this drama to allow the higher light to peek in, or something in you must have already matured enough that in that higher part in you have a glimpse. So for a moment at least, the drama does not come in the way. But once you have a higher glimpse, then everything becomes very simple. It doesn't happen to everybody. For the mass, there has to be a gradual process, and that is why civilization is so important. The character of civilization is the refinement of values. And even at the level of the senses, there is a refinement to higher, subtler, more beautiful, more true things, which make possible now the influence of the soul to come forward and enjoy that. Whereas things which are coarse, perverse, distortions, ugliness, and enjoyment of ugliness repel the soul, and the soul withdraws from that. Its vibrations are incompatible with that. And it leads to a collapse of civilization. And in the modern age, we're seeing a little bit of this. If you look back in the past, there were so many attempts in different ways, in different parts of the world, of refining, civilizing, culturing. Now suddenly the crude and everything is thrown together in a big mixture. And for young children, it is very difficult to handle this because the adults present the coarse as something valuable or even more valuable than the refined. And their innate sensitivity is confused or covered up by these influences. So navigating through this mess is not easy for the young children of today. You have to be lucky to have parents who have refinement.
Look at the civilizations before and after centuries, it was always, just.
There was always mixture.
I mean, if you look at the Romans or the Egyptians or the Greek or whatever, it was just too
Yes, perhaps.
I mean, it's the first time now that we have a possibility of something coming.
Okay.
It's not there before. It's crazy. Just one big mess.
Yes.
There is 11 types of vital in Ayurveda. 11 different types of vital they are describing.
Okay.
So, and they are also telling for each one some medicine.
What is the term?
11 vital. 11 types of vital.
What is the term in Sanskrit?
Vital, say Prana.
Asha.
So they have defined some 11.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that.
So my question is that suppose you give, instead of psychological and psychic way, if one can give that medicine, whether it will work or not.
Yes, there is. Yes, yes, it is interesting. So there's a very important principle here. Remember, life force working in mind and life force working in body is the same life force, although operations are different completely because of the substance being different. So it is possible that you intervene on life force in the body through medicine, and affect through it the life force working in the mind. It's possible to do that. And that is where many of the psychiatric medicines operate like that. Psychiatric medicine, although they are physical chemicals with physical effects on the nervous system, they interfere with certain operations of the life energy in a way that it changes your mind pattern of thinking, but often in a very crude way. But there are much more refined influences which are there in Ayurveda or in homeopathy and several of these systems, where something subtle which taps on the life energy in a particular way modifies the agitation, reduces agitation, or brings into the life energy a burst of clarity, burst of light, and suddenly many things become much simpler. A lot of these things do exist and they can be used very effectively, but up to a point. Because I may momentarily get clarity, but if I have an attachment to the old confusion, if I'm an attraction to it, after a while I get dulled to this clarity influence and I move back and the old habit returns. This is the reason why often when such medicines are given, first there is great improvement, and then after a while the improvement stops. Because the person didn't take advantage to change his consciousness habit in the mind and went back to the old, and now it is as if the influence of the new has become less effective, even been pushed out by the old habit.
In today's paper, they said that one Kolkata tea company has sent 6,000 bags of green tea to Donald Trump to purify his mind. There was no response from Mr. Trump.
I had even heard of one doctor, homeopath, who used to treat addictions. So what he would do is, say you had an addiction to cigarettes. He had some set of, I don't know, 6 or 7 medicines. He would give you one and he'd try it out. If he couldn't identify from your symptoms, he would give you one and try out, and he would try another. And the method he did was this. He would have you hold the cigarette, smoke it, and the medicine he would make you hold in your hand. And the moment you held the right medicine, the taste of the cigarette would go. You would lose, and then he would give you that medicine and it would be gone in just 2 or 3 doses. It's quite dramatic when you think about it, but it is operating the level of life force.
Like suppose those who are not smoking, they feel bad smell. So that medicine also produces.
Yes.
So they don't like it.
But now if you think about this, the action is on the life force by physical device or directly by life energy. That's also possible, isn't it? So suppose somebody is there who has in his consciousness a complete freedom from the sense of addiction, and somebody else is addicted. If the energy of the clear person is now infused in the person who has an addiction, it can clear it for a while, free him from the addiction momentarily. After that, it depends on the person. If he takes advantage of it to set a new habit, or after a while he pushes out the fresh energy, changing energy, and goes back to his habit, and then creates by habit for the new consciousness which could free him. Then he's more stuck more deeply. Okay? So somebody can help directly by an action of life energy if he has what the other needs. Take this logic one more step. Who is the one who has all possible imprints of life energy? The divine. Who is the one who is free of all things, who has all that you need? And you can open that part of your consciousness which has the addiction to the divine consciousness. Invoke that action of light and force from the mother on that part. She can swiftly wash out that, reshape, remold the habit and free you from it. But from your side, there should be willingness and not the closed tendency which is there in the addiction. It is closed to any influence from outside. The person gets disturbed when someone criticizes his addiction. If the person can accept, all right, here's a habit, it's not me, I do not wish it, and opens it, then the action of the spiritual force can very quickly clear it. And we know so many cases of people who have been able to do that. Sometimes as simply as putting it down and saying no more. And that's it. There's no reaction. Yes.
No, in earlier your lecture, you that more austerities. Then you say your life energy. How can we get that? Directly connecting
Mhm.
to the
Yes, yes, yes.
So how? What is the
So Mother speaks of drawing life energy
in your
3 ways. You can draw from below through food or through a lower grade of energy, which is useful for the dense, coarser layers of life force in the body. And it can even give you a grip on the material things. Or you can draw from pure prana, and even within that there are gradations depending on where you are more conscious. But the best way, she says, is to draw from above, the spiritual consciousness and the energy of the divine, which enters you as life force. It is the purest and the most liberating and transforming in its result. So to draw on that.
When that peace also comes, that pure force is also
Yes. Open yourself from Mother's way. We can close for today. So we just look back at the picture that Sri Aurobindo gives us. Life force entering the 3 layers of mind, bringing its own distortions, and each of those layers interacting with each other in confusion. The imprint of desire and how the desire clouds covers the deeper truth of things. On each of these 3 levels, how the true functioning of that level is covered by this distorted play caused by life force, and behind a deeper truth and reality and functioning, which could easily come forward if this confusion is removed. And we have a very clear picture of what's happening in us. And with this clarity, now the solution also becomes obvious. And then even the application of the solution becomes simpler and more spontaneous. Oh.